June 8, 1967. The American spy ship USS Liberty is sailing off the coast of Egypt at the height of the Six-Day War between Egypt and Israel. At approximately 1400 hours, the Liberty is attacked by 4 unidentified aircraft, killing and wounding dozens of its sailors. Shortly after this, the ship is again attacked by 3 motor torpedo boats who pelt the ship with small arms fire and manage to land a torpedo hit on the Liberty. The crew of the Liberty finally manages to identify their attackers. The assailants are none other than the close American ally, Israel. 34 Americans are killed, and the attack is rife with controversy to this day over whether this was a case of mistaken identity or an intentional attack. In this video, I will cover the attack on the Liberty in detail with perspectives from both sides of the incident. In addition, I will analyze the different views on the true nature of the incident. This includes the U.S. and Israeli claim of the attack being a simple case of misidentification and the opinion held by many of the survivors themselves that the attack was intentional from the start. First, let's look at the USS Liberty. The Liberty was originally a Victory-class cargo ship built during World War II and was originally named the SS Simmons Victory. She would serve as a cargo vessel until 1963 when she was acquired by the U.S. Navy. At that time, she was converted into what was known as a technical research ship and renamed the USS Liberty. Ostensibly, the ship was meant for conducting research into atmospheric and communications phenomena, while in reality, the ship was meant for collecting signals intelligence for the NSA. The true mission was considered to be an open secret and is also why the Liberty was considered a spy ship. In 1967, the Liberty was off the west coast of Africa in late May before stopping at Naval Station Rota for a few days where they took on supplies as well as several linguists, mostly Arab linguists and a Russian linguist. The Liberty's next assignment was to head to the eastern Mediterranean. While underway, Israel had launched an attack on Egypt, triggering what is now known as the Six-Day War. The Liberty was directed to set up station off the coast of Egypt and begin collecting intelligence, primarily the monitoring of communications which could be translated on board before being sent back to the NSA in Washington, D.C. The primary target of this intelligence gathering was Egypt, who had close ties to the Soviet Union. By June 8th, the war between Israel and Egypt was in its 4th day, and the Egyptian forces had largely begun to retreat from the Sinai Peninsula after their defeat at the Battle of Abu Agela, and Israeli forces were advancing rapidly and would occupy most of the peninsula by the end of the day. The Liberty, meanwhile, was just off the coast of the peninsula in international waters on June 8th. The ship was sailing on her own after being denied a destroyer escort, a decision that would have disastrous consequences for Liberty and her crew. In the morning, the Liberty had observed several Israeli aircraft flying near the ship. This is corroborated by Israeli sources that report having correctly identified Liberty as an American ship before being identified specifically as the USS Liberty based on its GTR-5 hull marking. The Israelis had marked the Liberty's position on their control table but removed it at 1100 hours due to its position no longer being known. This is reportedly in line with standard practices in the Israeli Navy. Shortly after this, reports came in that Israeli forces had been shelled from the sea near the area, prompting the Israeli Navy to investigate. They dispatched 3 torpedo boats to identify any potential vessels in the area. This is where things begin to get complicated. First thing to note is that the Liberty was only armed with 4 .50 caliber machine guns and could in no way have been the vessel that reportedly shelled Israeli forces. In addition, the reports of a ship having shelled Israeli troops in the Sinai was considered dubious at best by the Israelis themselves. The first, and arguably most important error, was when a ship was identified by the Israeli torpedo boats on radar. They identified a vessel at a distance of 22 miles, and they calculated that this ship was moving at approximately 28 knots or 32 miles per hour. This speed was known to be too great to be anything other than a military vessel. The ship was thus identified as an enemy target due to no other known vessels being in the area. The ship identified and considered hostile was in fact the USS Liberty. The biggest error was that the Liberty could not reach a speed of 28 knots. The fastest Liberty could go was 17.5 knots at best, and at the time, Liberty was only traveling at approximately 5 knots. How this error in speed estimation was made has never been identified, at least not by the Israelis. Their sources provide several hypotheses, which include that the torpedo radar was detecting Liberty at the edge of its maximum range, that it was human error despite 2 separate radar operators providing estimated speed, and possible technological drawbacks. Regardless, the error caused Israel to believe the Liberty was a hostile warship per their official sources. Also, per Israeli operating procedures at the time, no further attempts at identification were to be made, and 2 Mirage fighters were dispatched to engage the vessel and delay it until the torpedo boats arrived. The aircraft arrived at Liberty at approximately 1400 hours and were cleared to attack. These pilots would later claim to have seen no distinguishable marks or flags, despite the Liberty being clearly marked with the GTR-5 hull markings and flying an American flag. Liberty had been conducting a general quarters drill when the 2 Mirage fighters began opening fire with 30mm cannons. With a large proportion of the ship's crew on the deck, 8 men were killed and dozens were wounded in this first wave, and the American flag was knocked down. Liberty's captain, Commander William McGonigal, was among those wounded, though he would still command the ship for the next 17 hours. Liberty's crew also made continued efforts to raise replacement flags in order to ward off any further attacks. After expending their ammunition, the Mirages broke off their attack. The Liberty then frantically radioed for assistance from the nearby 6th Fleet, though help would not arrive in time. At this point, the Liberty was unsure of who was attacking them. 2 Super Mystere fighters then joined in the assault on Liberty, making several strafing runs and hitting Liberty with a napalm bomb that ignited numerous fires on the deck. Per Israeli sources, these aircraft attempted at least one identification run but failed to deduce the nationality of the Liberty. Now, the torpedo boats were ordered into the fray as the air attack ended. One of these torpedo boats was informed by one of the Mirages from the first air assault that the target ship was a Hunt-class destroyer. How the pilot misidentified the Liberty, that was a converted cargo vessel, for a destroyer that was half the size and only a fifth of the tonnage is a mystery. As the 3 torpedo boats closed in, they attempted to identify the vessel again. This time, they misidentified the Liberty as the Egyptian cargo vessel El Qasir. This misidentification is suspect as well due to differences in the 2 vessels that I'll cover later in the video. After this misidentification, the torpedo boats began to close in. The Liberty had reported raising a large American flag around this time, though it could have been obscured by smoke from the numerous fires on board. At this point, 2 of the Liberty's 50 caliber machine guns began to open fire before being ordered to stop once Commander McGonigal had identified Israeli flags on the torpedo boats. McGonigal realized they may have inadvertently been attacked by Israel. Unfortunately, this machine gun fire from Liberty prompted the torpedo boats to open up return fire. They also fired a total of 5 torpedoes at Liberty around 1443, with one striking Liberty near her stern. This torpedo strike killed 25 sailors and wounded dozens more. The torpedo boats then circled Liberty while still firing on her, but they were finally able to see the GTR-5 markings. The torpedo boats ceased firing in order to identify the ship. At 15:30, the Liberty was finally identified according to Israeli sources, and the attack was over. Liberty was severely damaged and listing, but she remained afloat. The torpedo boats offered assistance but were turned away by Liberty. Israel issued a prompt apology that day for the incident, and Liberty's wounded were evacuated to the 6th Fleet. In all, 34 Americans were dead and 171 were wounded. The Liberty was able to limp to Malta under its own power for repairs before returning to the United States several months later. The ship was damaged beyond repair and would ultimately be scrapped a few years later. At the time, the U.S. accepted the Israeli explanation of the attack without much question. The official story was that the ship was misidentified and the attack was nothing more than mistaken identity. In the ensuing years, many would assert that the attack was deliberate, including many Liberty survivors. So let's take a look at some of the issues at hand. One of the reasons presented for the attack on the Liberty being intentional is the claim that Israel did not want the United States monitoring their radio communications. Some reasons proposed for this is that Israel had not yet invaded Syria and occupied the Golan Heights, which the U.S. opposed. Outside this, there seems to be little that Israel would have to worry about as far as their own communication intercepts, since the United States was an ally. Liberty also wouldn't have been in position to intercept anything related to Syria in all likelihood, due to their focus on battlefield communications from the Egyptians. Another reason presented for the attack is that Israel intended it as a false flag to draw the United States into the war by blaming Egypt. The logic of this breaks down almost immediately. By June 8th, Israel had the war with Egypt practically won. They had established air superiority by destroying the Egyptian Air Force, and the Sinai Peninsula was almost entirely in their control, which was the primary strategic goal of the war. Israel did not need U.S. assistance since they had no further territorial ambitions and they had essentially already won the war. Israel had little to gain and a lot to lose with this alleged reasoning. Ultimately, the attack on Liberty comes down to several factors that compounded one another. The first crucial mistake was the removal of Liberty from the Israeli control table. This was followed by the investigation of the reported shelling of Israeli troops that was supposedly from the sea. This report turned out to be false, but the subsequent investigation led to Liberty being identified on radar, but speed was misjudged and Liberty was considered a hostile warship. Israeli policy, which dictated that no further efforts needed to be made to identify the Liberty, would worsen the situation. The first wave of air attacks failed to attempt to identify Liberty and in fact misidentified Liberty as a destroyer. This is just plain human error. I have no reasonable explanation for this mistake other than incompetence. The second air attack again failed to identify Liberty. The most egregious failure by far falls on the torpedo boats. The misidentification of Liberty as the El Qasir is again only explained by error and incompetence. The El Qasir is far smaller than Liberty and lacks many of the features present on Liberty. In fairness to the torpedo boats, this misjudgment was likely reinforced when the Liberty opened fire on them briefly. But this still does not explain why they could not see the USS Liberty name on the stern of the ship, or why it took so long to identify the GTR-5 markings on Liberty's hull. Again, the anxiety and stress of war, as well as fatigue, may have played a factor. Still, there is ample opportunity for a correct identification to be made. It's also important to note that incidents like this are not unheard of in wartime. During the Six-Day War, there were numerous friendly fire incidents with Israel bombing their own troops due to misidentification. In 1988, the cruiser USS Vincennes had misidentified an airliner as a threat and shot it down, killing 290 people. A similar incident occurred in 2020 when Iran misidentified an airliner as a cruise missile and shot it down as well. The attack on the Liberty was a tragedy that resulted from the fog of war and compounding human errors. It is my belief that the attack was in no way intentional on the part of Israel. They had little to gain and far too much to lose. Unfortunately, that does nothing to bring back the 34 sailors killed or take away the wounds and trauma suffered by the survivors. I hope you found this video informative, and I'll see you on the next one.